Representation is defined as the portrayal of someone or something in a particular way. How many of you in your K-12 education have heard of Pablo Picasso, Albert Einstein, or George Washington? Probably most of you. Now, how many of you have heard of Bridget Riley, Marie Curie, or Madeleine Albright? Maybe not as many. The three women I just listed are important artists, scientists, and politicians like the men I listed before them. I've spent a good portion of my adult life wondering why I didn't hear about influential people like the ones I just listed, and instead being told over and over again about these great men who were white and also dead. Why were we never told about influential LGBT people, women, or other minorities, or even people that are still alive? That's not to say that these men weren't great, but as I was going through school, I wanted to know about famous people of different ethnicities that were like the ones I knew, and women like me. I didn't know how important representation was until I graduated high school. I want to tell you about my best friend, Cole. We met in second grade, but didn't become close until sixth. We had the same interests. We both loved Lady Gaga, a hot new upcoming artist who challenged ideas of normal, and we both loved reading any new book that hit the library shelves. It didn't take long for me to develop a crush. We did eventually date, but everything changed when we got to middle school. In addition to being in a completely new environment, my classmates laughed at me for being weird, and I struggled to communicate my thoughts and feelings to others. As a result, I became very secluded. Cole made new friends, and we dated on and off depending on his mood. I just assumed he was dealing with the same problems as me. I began to look to people I knew for guidance, real or fictional. My mom helped me talk through some of my problems, and I took notes from my favorite characters from books. Hermione Granger taught me to find happiness in my schoolwork. Wonder Woman taught me to be strong in the face of my sneering classmates, and Katniss Everdeen taught me to stand up for what I believed in. I became elated and confident. I knew I could work through this. In an attempt to reconnect with Cole, I convinced him to join the drama club with me. I was ready to express myself through the characters I portrayed on stage. Just when things were going well, they suddenly got much worse. Cole told me that we couldn't date anymore, ever. I was angry, I didn't understand why, and he didn't elaborate until a few weeks later. He liked boys. This came as a huge shock to me. I'd never heard of anyone liking the same gender. I'd never even thought of that as an option. I blamed myself. Was I not pretty enough? Was I not good enough for him? Thoughts like these are rampant in my head and were a result of the way I was raised. I decided he couldn't be my friend anymore. I avoided him for weeks, and during that time I was at my lowest point. Drama club, a once happy place, was now shrouded by darkness. I no longer found inspiration from my favorite characters, and I became very depressed. I began to miss him, so I started to debate this whole being gay thing with myself. I was still upset, but I reminded myself that he was more than just a boyfriend. He was my best friend, and for that reason I tried to put our differences aside. When we enrolled in high school, everything changed again, at least this time for the better. I still liked Cole, but I understood and accepted that all we would ever be is friends. We began to explore our interests. He gravitated toward music and I gravitated toward art. Art class became a new place of expression and creativity for me. My art teacher talked about artists I'd never heard of before, and I realized my interests had changed since elementary school. I loved hearing about artists like Frida Kahlo and Mary Cassatt, and tried to share my newfound interests with others. Cole and I still found time to fangirl about Lady Gaga behind the scenes at Drama Club, where we could actually be ourselves. Cole made me the happiest person in the world, and that's why I knew immediately that something was wrong our freshman year. He became very depressed and secluded. After a couple of weeks of bugging him, he finally told me what was wrong. He came out to his mom. I knew she would be upset, but I didn't know to what extent. She started to force him to go to church every Sunday and tried to convince him to change. It got worse. He wasn't allowed to join the dance team. She refused to pay for it. After a long build-up, his mom decided she wanted him out of her house our sophomore year. She told him he could only stay if he went to conversion therapy. We drove to my house that night. He stayed there for a couple of months, and we both invested in our creativity and joined our marching band's color guard. He slowly began to blossom, even in his terrible situation. Over the course of that year, I realized that I didn't want to be his girlfriend anymore. I wanted to support him in the best way I could, and I did. He eventually moved back in with his mom, but the senseless attempts at conversion continued. Eventually, I went to school for art, and I thought my struggles were over. I was out of high school. Cole was eventually able to move out of his mother's house, and she even started to come around to the idea of him being gay. Just after high school, my other friend told me that he was transgender. This was a new thing to me, not dissimilar to my first shock to the LGBT community, except this time someone I knew was having a complete transformation that would be very difficult. I supported him, now her, and did what I could from college to try to help her through her transition. I thought all was going well, despite having the same problem as Cole. Her family didn't support her. I thought she was doing okay. She wasn't. She killed herself. Late one night, she had told me she was fighting with her dad. I was tired, so I ignored her message. I hated myself more than I ever had before. Her funeral was not one of solace. Her family had angrily ripped her friends out of the pictures they hung of her. They only called her by her old name and kept telling everyone she was in a better place now. They talked like they expected it to happen, and after only a couple of weeks, there were no more mentions of her name, old or new. When I think about all my years of education, there was not one mention of LGBT people, not in history, not in science, and not in art. This needs to change. Misrepresentation happens daily, not only to the LGBT community, but other communities as well. If we educate others about successful women, minorities, and LGBT people, like scientists, artists, and important historical figures in school, we can pave the way for a new, more empathetic generation of students. Had I, a cis, straight, white girl in America, been exposed to people different from me, maybe I wouldn't have hated my best friend for something he couldn't control. Had Cole been exposed to different people, maybe he would have come to terms with his identity sooner. Had Blair been exposed, maybe she wouldn't have taken her own life. My life is full of what-ifs, and I'll never truly know what would have happened had things been different, but it doesn't have to be that way for others. Right now, in effect in the United States, there's a long list of anti-LGBT laws. It's illegal to join the military if you are transgender. It's illegal to even mention homosexuality in public health classes in 7 states, including Arizona, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and South Carolina. There are laws in review like House Bill 1205 in South Dakota and HB 5 in Alaska that allow discrimination based on religious views, including refusing health care. My goal is to share my story and advocate for the inclusion of LGBT and minority students in every classroom in America. We can draw more attention to LGBT artists and other successful people like Lady Gaga, Harvey Milk, and Michelangelo that inspire LGBT people. And we need art classes and programs like theater and marching band to be a safe place and creative outlet for students to express themselves however they need to. It's a big task to transform legislation, but through representation comes change.